a harrowing exploration of the Syrian conflict. This isn't your typical war story with a clear beginning and end. It's a labyrinth, a tangled web of grievances, international intervention, and the tragic descent of a nation into chaos. Today, we'll delve into the roots of this seemingly never-ending struggle, unpacking the events that transformed peaceful protests into a brutal civil war. Syrians yearning for a better life took to the streets. They were tired of economic hardship, a stagnant political system, and a government that seemed deaf to their pleas for reform. President Bashar al-Assad, initially confident in his grip on power, soon found himself facing a growing tide of dissent. His response? A brutal crackdown, a chilling display of force that sent shockwaves through the nation. Understand the Syrian conflict solely through the lens of a single leader would be a grave mistake. Syria carried within it a cauldron of simmering grievances, a legacy of past injustices. A devastating drought had crippled the agricultural sector, pushing countless farmers to the brink of poverty and propelling a mass exodus to already overcrowded cities. Sectarian divides, long kept in check, began to surface, exploited by both sides as the conflict deepened.
Government, the oppressor, adding that their celebration is for
feared
all
a
of
Sunni
Syria.
majority uprising. Sunnis, meanwhile, felt increasingly marginalized and oppressed. As the government crackdown intensified, the initial wave of peaceful protests morphed into something altogether more dangerous, an armed rebellion. The Free Syrian Army, a loose coalition of defectors from Assad's forces, emerged to challenge the regime. The conflict spiraled into a brutal civil war. International efforts to mediate the conflict proved futile. The Arab League's attempts at securing a ceasefire crumbled. The UN Security Council remained paralyzed by the vetoes of Russia and China, staunch allies of Assad. As the war escalated, the world watched with growing alarm, fearing a wider regional conflagration. In 2013, chemical weapons attacks rocked Damascus, raising the specter of a horrific escalation. The world held its breath, fearing the specter of a wider war. The US and its allies threatened retaliation, accusing Assad of using chemical weapons against his own people. Russia and Iran, meanwhile, stood firmly behind the Syrian leader, denying the accusations and accusing the rebels of carrying out the attacks. This international standoff pushed the world to the brink of a wider confrontation, a potential proxy war that could have drawn in major powers. Just when it seemed the conflict couldn't get any more complex, a new and terrifying threat emerged: the rise of ISIS. This brutal jihadist group, fueled by extremist ideology, swept across Syria and Iraq, seizing swathes of territory and declaring a caliphate. This strange bedfellow scenario further muddied the already murky waters of the Syrian conflict. With ISIS weakened, Assad turned his attention to regaining control of rebel-held territories. Idlib, the last major stronghold, became a potential flashpoint with Turkey, which supported some rebel groups. A fragile ceasefire, brokered by Russia and Turkey, brought a semblance of calm to the region, but tensions remained high. The Islamic State began seizing control of territory in Syria in 2013. After a series of terrorist attacks coordinated by the Islamic State across Europe in 2015, the United States, the United Kingdom, and other Arab partners expanded their air campaign in Iraq to include Syria. Together, these nations have conducted over 11,000 airstrikes against Islamic State targets in Syria. Meanwhile, at the request of the Syrian government in September 2015, Russia began launching airstrikes against what it claimed were Islamic State targets, while Syrian government forces achieved several notable victories over the Islamic State, including the reclamation of the city of Palmyra. According to the US-led coalition against the Islamic State, Iraqi security forces and the SDF have reclaimed 98% of the territory formerly held by the group in Iraq and Syria. With Russian and Iranian support, the Syrian government has steadily regained control of territory from opposition forces, including the opposition's stronghold in Aleppo in 2016. The regime has been accused of using chemical weapons numerous times over the course of the conflict. resulting in international condemnation in 2013, 2017, and 2018. Opposition forces have maintained limited control in Idlib, in northwestern Syria and on the Iraq-Syria border. Efforts to reach a diplomatic resolution have been unsuccessful. Geneva Peace Talks on Syria, a UN-backed conference for facilitating a political transition led by UN Special Envoy Staffan de Mistura, have been unsuccessful in reaching a political resolution as opposition groups and Syrian regime officials struggle to find mutually acceptable terms for resolving the conflict. The round of peace talks began in Geneva in May 2017 with an 18-person delegation from Syria, but has since stalled. Also in 2017, peace talks initiated by Russia in Astana, Kazakhstan, with Iran, Turkey, and members of Syria's government and armed opposition leaders resulted in a ceasefire agreement and the establishment of 4 de-escalation zones. After the ceasefire was announced, attacks by Syrian government forces against rebel-held areas in the de-escalation zones resumed. Kazakhstan, with Iran, Turkey, and members of Syria's government and armed opposition leaders resulted in a ceasefire agreement and the establishment of 4 de-escalation zones. After the ceasefire was announced, attacks by Syrian government forces against rebel-held areas in the de-escalation zones resumed.